into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
Leatherhead is about 12 miles from Maybury Hill. The scent of hay was in the air through the lush meadows beyond Clifford, and the hedges on either side were sweet and gay with multitudes of dog roses. The heavy firing that had broken out while we were driving down Maybury Hill ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving the evening very peaceful and still. We got to Leatherhead without misadventure about 9 o'clock, and the horse had an hour's rest while I took supper with my cousins and commended my wife to their care. My wife was curiously silent throughout the drive and seemed oppressed with forebodings of evil. I talked to her reassuringly, pointing out that the Martians were tied to the pit by sheer heaviness, and at the utmost could but crawl a little out of it, but she answered only in monosyllables.
Into the storm, I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
Had it not been for my promise to the innkeeper, she would, I think, have urged me to stay in Leatherhead that night. Would that I had. Her face, I remember, was very white as we parted. For my own part, I had been feverishly excited all day. Something very like the war fever that occasionally runs through a civilized community had got into my blood, and in my heart I was not so very sorry that I had to return to Maybury that night.
Into the storm, I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
I was even afraid that that last fusillade I had heard might mean the extermination of our invaders from Mars. I can best express my state of mind by saying that I wanted to be in at the death. It was nearly 11 when I started to return. The night was unexpectedly dark. To me, walking out of the lighted passage of my cousin's house, it seemed indeed black, and it was as hot and close as the day.
To Leatherhead, hay in the air was the scent. The heavy firing ended as abruptly as it my wife into their care. She had become silent through the drive. The thought of the Martians filled her with dread and
Must have been mad, going back to
Overhead, the clouds were driving fast, albeit not a breath stirred the shrubs about us. My cousin's man lit both lamps. Happily, I knew the road intimately. My wife stood in the light of the doorway and watched me until I jumped up into the dogcart. Then abruptly she turned and went in, leaving my cousins side by side, wishing me good hap.
My wife stood in the light of the doorway until I started to drive away. It was about 11 when I started to return. The night seemed unusually dark to me. Overhead the clouds were driving into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the
I was a little depressed at first with the contagion of my wife's fears, but very soon my thoughts reverted to the Martians. At that time, I was absolutely in the dark as to the course of the evening's fighting.
Into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
I did not know even the circumstances that had precipitated the conflict. As I came through Ockham, for that was the way I returned, and not through Send and Old Woking, I saw along the western horizon a blood-red glow, which as I drew nearer, crept slowly up the sky. The driving clouds of the gathering thunderstorm mingled there with masses of black and red smoke.
Into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
Ripley Street was deserted, and except for a lighted window or so, the village showed not a sign of life. But I narrowly escaped an accident at the corner of the road to Pierford, where a knot of people stood with their backs to me. They said nothing to me as I passed. I do not know what they knew of the things happening beyond the hill, nor do I know if the silent houses I passed on my way were sleeping securely, or deserted and empty, or harassed and watching against the terror of the night. From Ripley until I came through Pierford, I was in the valley of the Wey, and the red glare was hidden from me.
Into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm. Into the storm. I drove right into the storm. I must have been mad, going back towards the storm.
As I ascended the little hill beyond Pierford Church, the glare came into view again, and the trees about me shivered with the first intimation of the storm that was upon me. Then I heard midnight pealing out from Pierford Church behind me, and then came the silhouette of Maybury Hill, with its treetops and roofs black and sharp against the red. Even as I beheld this, a lurid green glare lit the road about me and showed the distant woods towards Addlestone. I felt a tug at the reins.
Something was in the storm. Something strode through the storm. I must have been mad going into that storm. The thunder was gathering and the lightning has begun. A strange crackling pop or lambent, like the working of a gigantic electric machine. Something we want was in the storm. Something strode through the storm. I must have been mad going into that storm.
Driving clouds had been pierced, as it were, by a thread of green fire, suddenly lighting their confusion and falling into the field to my left. It was the third falling star. Close on its apparition, and blindingly violet by contrast, danced out the first lightning of the gathering storm, and the thunder burst like a rocket overhead. The horse took the bit between his teeth and bolted. A moderate incline runs towards the foot of Maybury Hill, and down this we clattered.
Something was in the storm. Something strode through the storm. I must have been mad going into that storm. Something was in the storm. Something strode through the storm. I must have been mad going into that storm.
The flickering light was blinding and confusing, and a thin hail smote gustily at my face as I drove down the slope. At first, I regarded little but the road before me, and then abruptly my attention was arrested by something that was moving rapidly down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill. At first, I took it for the wet roof of a house, but one flash following another showed it to be in swift, rolling movement. It was an elusive vision, a moment of bewildering darkness, and then, in a flash like daylight, the red masses of the orphanage near the crest of the hill, the green tops of the pine trees, and this problematical object came out clear and sharp and bright.
I must have been alone, going into the
And this thing I saw, how can I describe it? A monstrous tripod, higher than many houses, striding over the young pine trees and smashing them aside in its career. A walking engine of glittering metal, striding now across the heather. Articulate ropes of steel dangling from it, and the clattering tumult of its passage mingling with the riot of the thunder.
Gleaming, screaming, striding,
a gleaming tripod fighting machine.
A flash, and it came out vividly, heeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and reappear almost instantly, as it seemed, with the next flash 100 yards nearer. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowled violently along the ground? That was the impression those instant flashes gave. But instead of a milking stool, imagine it a great body of machinery on a tripod stand.
gleaming, screaming, striding, a gleaming tripod fighting machine. Screaming, striding, a gleaming tripod fighting machine.
Then suddenly the trees in the pine wood ahead of me were parted, as brittle reeds are parted by a man thrusting through them. They were snapped off and driven headlong, and a second huge tripod appeared, rushing, as it seemed, headlong towards me, and I was galloping hard to meet it. At the sight of the second monster, my nerve went all together. Not stopping to look again, I wrenched the horse's head hard round to the right, and in another moment the dogcart had heeled over upon the horse.
Screaming,
Striding,
a gleaming tripod fighting machine.
The shaft smashed noisily, and I was flung sideways and fell heavily into a shallow pool of water. I crawled out almost immediately and crouched, my feet still in the water, under a clump of firs. The horse lay motionless. His neck was broken, poor brute, and by the lightning flashes I saw the black bulk of the overturned dogcart and the silhouette of the wheel still spinning slowly. another moment, the colossal mechanism went striding by me and passed uphill towards Pierford. Seen nearer, the thing was incredibly strange, for it was no mere insensate machine driving on its way. Machine it was, with a ringing metallic pace and long, flexible, glittering tentacles, one of which gripped a young pine tree, swinging and rattling about its strange body. It picked its road as it went striding along, and the brazen hood that surmounted it moved to and fro with the inevitable suggestion of a head looking about. Behind the main body was a huge mass of white metal like a gigantic fisherman's basket, and puffs of green smoke squirted out from the joints of the limbs as the monster swept by me, and in an instant it was gone. So much I saw then, all vaguely for the flickering of the lightning in blinding highlights and dense black shadows. As it passed, it set up an exultant, deafening howl that drowned the thunder. And in another minute, it was with its companion, half a mile away, stooping over something in the field. I have no doubt this thing in the field was the third of the 10 cylinders they had fired at us from Mars. For some minutes I lay there in the rain and darkness watching, by the intermittent light, these monstrous beings of metal moving about in the distance over the hedge tops. A thin hail was now beginning, and as it came and went, their figures grew misty and then flashed into clearness again. Now and then came a gap in the lightning, and the night swallowed them up. I was soaked with hail above and puddle water below. It was some time before my blank astonishment would let me struggle up the bank to a drier position, or think at all of my imminent peril. Not far from me was a little one-roomed squatter's hut of wood, surrounded by a patch of potato garden. I struggled to my feet at last, and crouching and making use of every chance of cover, I made a run for this. I hammered at the door, but I could not make the people hear, if there were any people inside, and after a time I desisted, and, availing myself of a ditch for the greater part of the way, succeeded in crawling, unobserved by these monstrous machines, into the pine woods towards Maybury. Under cover of this, I pushed on, wet and shivering now, towards my own house. I walked among the trees, trying to find the footpath. It was very dark indeed in the wood, for the lightning was now becoming infrequent, and the hail, which was pouring down in a torrent, fell in columns through the gaps in the heavy foliage. If I had fully realized the meaning of all the things I had seen, I should have immediately worked my way round, through Byfleet to Street Cobham, and so gone back to rejoin my wife at Leatherhead. But that night the strangeness of things about me and my physical wretchedness prevented me, for I was bruised, weary, wet to the skin, deafened and blinded by the storm. I had a vague idea of going on to my own house, and that was as much motive as I had. I staggered through the trees, fell into a ditch, and bruised my knees against a plank, and finally splashed out into the lane that ran down from the College Arms. I say splashed, for the storm water was sweeping the sand down the hill in a muddy torrent. There in the darkness, a man blundered into me and sent me reeling back. He gave a cry of terror, sprang sideways, and rushed on before I could gather my wits sufficiently to speak to him. So heavy was the stress of the storm, just at this place, that I had the hardest task to win my way up the hill. I went close up to the fence on the left and worked my way along its palings. Near the top, I stumbled upon something soft, and by a flash of lightning saw between my feet a heap of black broadcloth and a pair of boots. Before I could distinguish clearly how the man lay, the flicker of light had passed. I stood over him, waiting for the next flash. When it came, I saw that he was a sturdy man, cheaply but not shabbily dressed. His head was bent under his body, and he lay crumpled up close to the fence, as though he had been flung violently against it.
Finding no path, not progressing with ease. I kept on going on to my own house. That was as much motive as I had. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. If I had known the meaning of what I had seen, this was the last place I should have been. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. Going against what common sense said, I should have gone back to Leatherhead. So heavy was the stress of the storm. My heart is tasked to win my way up the hill. Near the top I stumbled upon a dead man. Before I could distinguish clearly how the man lay, the flicker of light had passed away. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. If I had known the meaning of what I had seen, this was the last place I should have been. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. Going against what common sense said, I should have gone back to Leatherhead.
Overcoming the repugnance natural to one who had never before touched a dead body, I stooped and turned him over to feel for his heart. He was quite dead. Apparently his neck had been broken. The lightning flashed for a third time, and his face leaped upon me. I sprang to my feet. It was the landlord of the Spotted Dog, whose conveyance I had taken. I stepped over him gingerly and pushed on up the hill.
I stepped over him gingerly and pushed on up the hill, past the college arms towards my own house. Nothing was burning on the hillside, so far as I could see by the flashes. The houses about me were mostly uninjured. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. If I had known the meaning of what I had seen, this was the last place I should have been. Back to my house on Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. Going against what common sense said, I should have gone back to Leatherhead.
Down the road towards Maybury Bridge there were voices and the sound of feet, but I had not the courage to shout or to go to them. I let myself in with my latchkey, closed, locked and bolted the door, staggered to the foot of the staircase and sat down.
I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back to Leatherhead.
My imagination was full of those striding metallic monsters and of the dead bodies smashed against the fence. I crouched at the foot of the staircase with my back to the wall, shivering violently.
Back to my house on Maybury Hill. Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back to my house on Maybury Hill. Maybury Hill, Maybury Hill. I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back. I should have gone back. I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back. I should have gone back. I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back to I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back to Leatherhead. I should have gone back to Leatherhead.